Hello friends, welcome to day 2 of the second International Apologetics Marathon of 2017 right here on ABN's Trinity channel. It's a blessing to have you here with us, and if you were not here with us yesterday, we asked that you would tune in to the Trinity channel's YouTube channel where we have yesterday's 3 shows already available for you to watch. It'll be the same thing today for today's shows as well later on this evening. After we're done with show 3, they should be on YouTube shortly after that. And of course, we also have, I believe, 2 shows in English tomorrow. 2 shows Thursday and 3 shows Friday. Now, this is in addition to the Arabic shows that are happening as well. So if you do speak Arabic or can at least understand Arabic, there are shows that you can listen to. And again, those are on YouTube as well on a different channel. But those are happening throughout this International Apologetics Marathon as well. And it's a blessing to have you here with us. We thank you so much for your prayers and support throughout the year, which allow these marathons to happen twice per year, as well as all of the weekly shows that are now happening. Every single Monday, we have Colliding Worldviews. We have Rasho Christie's Truth Matters. On Tuesdays, we have Pastor Joseph's The Cross and the Crescent. And then on Friday, Islam and the News, a 1-hour news program of news headlines, pictures, videos, etc. that you will not get in the mainstream media, which a lot of people are loving. So we thank you for all your feedback. And we want to kick this off today with a very, very important topic that a lot of people are not knowledgeable about. And it is a blessing to have with me a brother in Christ here in the studio, as well as 2 great scholars through Skype. And I'm going to introduce them to you now. To my right, I have Bashar Shukri. He's a bondservant of the Lord Jesus Christ. Bashar is currently doing shows for the English discipleship programming on ABN to help instruct and guide new converts with his pastor, Chris Palmer. Bashar is very involved in his church, Light of Today, and allows the Lord to use him as a tool to evangelize, teach, and preach the Word of God. He has a bachelor's degree in accounting and is also considering going to seminary to look closer in the ministry. Bashar also helps with new shows and enjoys being a part of the marathons, namely this one, which is happening right now. So, Bashar, it's a blessing to have you here in the studio.
Oh yeah, amen. And it's a blessing to be with you, Tony. This is awesome. I always enjoyed watching marathons, so it's great to be a part of one now.
Amen. Well, it's a blessing to have you here along with our other guests. I first want to introduce, because I do have him on video, I have Dr. Bill Warner. He holds a PhD in physics and math from North Carolina State University, graduated in 1968. He has been a university professor, a businessman, and applied physicist. He was a member of the technical staff in solid-state physics at the Sarnoff-Princeton laboratories in the area of integrated circuit structures. During the energy crisis of the 1980s, he founded and ran a company that specialized in energy-efficient homes. For 8 years, he was a professor at Tennessee State University in the engineering school. Dr. Warner has had a long life interest in religion and its effects on history. He has studied the source texts of the major religions for decades. Even before the destruction of the World Trade Center, he had predicted the war between Islam and America. The day after 9/11, he decided to make the source text of Islam available for the average person. If you are not aware of his works, go on Amazon, type in Bill Warner, and you're going to get a whole bunch of resources that he has put together. Dr. Warner, it's such a blessing to have you here on ABN's Trinity channel once again.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of ABN because it let us discuss such topics.
And there's really no other places out there that do. So that's why I try to encourage people to continue to watch ABN the Trinity channel, let other people know about it as well. But my other guest, who it was a blessing to have on Colliding Worldviews just about, I think probably about a month and a half ago. We do have him here by phone. We will try to get his video work. Oh, we have video working. Great. We have Raymond Ibrahim once again here on ABN's Trinity channel. He is a widely published author, public speaker, and Middle East and Islam specialist. His books include Crucified Again, Exposing Islam's New War on Christians, and The Al-Qaeda Reader. His writings, translations, and observations have appeared in a variety of publications, including the New York Times, CNN, LA Times, Fox News, Financial Times, Jerusalem Post, New York Times Syndicate, United Press International, USA Today, Washington Post, Washington Times, and Weekly Standard. Scholarly journals including the Almanac of Islamism, Chronicle of Higher Education, Hoover Institution Strategica, Jane's Islamic Affairs analyst, Middle East Quarterly, and Middle East Review of International Affairs, and popular websites such as American Thinker, The Blaze, Bloomberg, Breitbart, Christian Post, Daily Caller, Front Page Magazine, Gatestone Institute, The Inquisitor, Jihad Watch, Newsmax, National Review Online, PJ Media, the UK's Commentator, WND, and World Magazine. He has contributed chapters to several anthologies and has been translated into dozens of languages. Now, if people are unaware, Ibrahim's dual background, born and raised in the U.S. by Coptic Egyptian parents, born and raised in the Middle East. He has provided him with unique advantages, from equal fluency in English and Arabic to an equal understanding of the Western and Middle Eastern mindsets, positioning him to explain the latter to the former. His interest in Islamic civilization was first peaked when he began visiting the Middle East as a child in the 1970s. Interacting and conversing with the locals throughout the decades has provided him with an intimate appreciation for that part of the world, complementing his academic training. He received a bachelor's and master's both in history, focusing on the ancient and medieval Near East, with dual minors in philosophy and literature from California State University, Fresno. He went on and studied closely with noted military historian Victor David Hansen. And it is a blessing to have both of these scholars here with us on this very important show that a lot of people need to hear about, because I don't recall ABN ever doing a show specifically on this topic. Yeah. And if they have, it's been quite some time. So Raymond Ibrahim, welcome back to ABN.
Hi, Tony. Very good to be with you again.
It's a blessing to have both of you here. And I just want to start off, because we have viewers out there who have no idea what this is. Again, the title of the show is The History of Dhimmitude. And people are like, what's that? And anyone who's read any book on Islam, they hear about it in the news, oh, I better go get a book. And they go get a book that was written maybe in the last 5 to 10 years. And it might be written by a liberal scholar or something else. They may not even get this term at all. And unless people are actually looking to the primary sources of Islam, they are not even really going to see dhimmitude, or even the word dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I. So we want to educate our viewers from the top down or from the bottom up, however we want to look at it, but just get them well-rounded in knowledge about this. So Raymond, what is a dhimmi?
Well, you know, we have the classical Arabic Islamic law definition, and then we have sort of these colloquial, newly coined words that complement it. So to begin with the former, a dhimmi in Islamic law, or let's actually begin etymologically with the word, which comes from dhimma, and it's really associated with the idea of being responsible for something, or being held accountable. And oftentimes the connotation is to be blameworthy of something. So that's the root of the word. And when the Muslim armies invaded and conquered much of the formerly Christian world in North Africa and in the Middle East, they, according to Islamic tradition, of course, because as you know, there's a whole school of thought that says the early Islamic histories are fabricated and so forth, but keeping it according to the Islamic tradition, Omar, the second caliph, second rightly guided caliph, as they call him, who much of the North African Middle East was conquered, Egypt and Syria specifically under his reign. He went to Jerusalem when it was conquered, and he created a pact, which is known as Ahd Omar, or in English, the stipulations or the conditions of Omar. And in it, he stipulated what non-Muslims can do. So now that's just to give you a little historical background to make sense of this word. In Islamic terminology, the people who are of the book, so-called Jews or Christians, Zoroastrians, depending on who Muslims want to give this title to, can continue to live as dhimmis under Islamic rule, but because they are blameworthy, they have to follow these stipulations, which I just mentioned. And all of this goes back to the Quran, Surah Al-Tawbah, or Quran 9:29. It says, fight the people of the book, etc., until they pay jizya and feel themselves, the Arabic word is sagharun, or basically humbled and made to feel submissive in a humiliating sense. So the people who became dhimmis historically had to pay jizya, and that's another word, the root of it, it means a substitute. So basically because my life is forfeit as an infidel, even as a Christian and a Jew, and that's another thing that people misinterpret. They try to make it sound like you're a Christian or a Jew or a people of a book, you have a better place than pagans, and you do marginally, but still your life is forfeit unless you pay jizya to basically buy your life, and this is tribute, and according to Quran 9:29, you have to do it while you feel subdued and humbled and mocked. And so according to Islamic traditions and the jurisprudence, sometimes you have to crawl on all four. Sometimes the Muslim who collects the money from you has to slap you, choke you, throw you around, and humiliate you. But so that is what a dhimmi is. Yes, they can live, they can exist as tolerated minorities, but it is very anachronistic, as people do today, to try to suggest that they were somehow citizens of the Islamic State, or I mean, to even call them second-class citizens doesn't really do it justice. They really had to, if you go back now to the conditions of Omar, the things they had to do is they can't build churches, they can't repair churches because churches should crumble and fall. That's if the country wasn't conquered, but actually gave itself up. But if it was conquered, then all the churches have to be destroyed immediately. But if it hasn't been conquered, then they can't build any churches and they can't even fix them. We'll basically leave your churches till they crumble, essentially. And then, you know, all these other sorts of things that are very reminiscent of, you know, if you want to think of the civil rights movement and how blacks were treated in America, it's the same sort of thing. It actually says in the conditions that if you are a dhimmi, a non-Muslim infidel, you have to give your seat up to a Muslim if he wants it. You have to house them in your home if they want it. You can't permit one of your own to convert to Islam unless they want to. But at the same time, you can't try to convert a Muslim. You can't show a Bible or a cross or ring the bells of the churches and so forth. So that's basically historically what a dhimmi has been, and that's the definition of the terminology and basically the groundwork behind it.
Now, it's interesting because in Dr. Mark Dury's book, The Third Choice, another great scholar on the subject of dhimmitude, he has here on page 43, classical Islamic law did not allow non-Muslims who lived in an Islamic state to gain a deep understanding of Islam. A famous early pact of surrender known as the Pact of Umar stipulated that non-Muslims would agree not to teach their children about Islam. It's interesting to see not that really mentioned, but we do see, even in the West today, when Christians especially go and try to learn about Islam, they get the primary sources saying, hey, these hold more authority than my Muslim neighbor or coworker who loves American freedom and the Bill of Rights and all that. Isn't that still kind of being implemented, not specifically, but in a way, when we're always told, well, no, if you want to learn about Islam, you need to invite an imam to come to your church and talk about it or something like that?
Well, yeah, that's just the whole thing, you know, that's the big disconnect of our times that is behind this plague that we're currently talking about and so many other epistemological plagues in the West, this inability to understand clear black and white textual writings, clear black and white assertions and quotations from prominent Muslims, including Muhammad, the caliphs, the ulama, the fuqaha, the jurisprudence, and all these people. And then we just, as you say, you allow the nice, friendly Muslim down the street come and whatever he says, well, that must be Islam. Well, of course, you can see the problem with that. It's a subjective approach to something that is well documented historically and doctrinally along the lines that I just delineated. It doesn't really waver from that. But this is where we're at because we prefer the subjective experiences. We prefer to somehow validate our own wishful thinking that, no, it doesn't mean that. And so when you have anyone who says it doesn't mean that, well, you know, they're the ones who appear on the media, they're the ones who are New York Times bestsellers, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter that they can't really document or support their position. It's enough that they say what people want to hear. And so that's where we're at.
Excellent. And Dr. Warner, I've already mentioned earlier your many books that you have available to people, even giving them a short guide saying, hey, this is 20, 30 pages long, but it's going to give you a lot of information that you yourself have read through thousands of pages to get. Now, you, sir, of all people, don't buy this watered-down, sugar-coated Walt Disney version of Islam that we get from the mainstream media and all that kind of stuff. Where do people find the dhimmi doctrine today? If they say, hey, I want to look to these sources that these guys look to, where can people look?
Well, first off, as Raymond said, there's only about one verse in the Quran that's about dhimmitude. But there are many things in the Hadith which address it. And of course, he's also covered the historical document of the Treaty of Umar. Now, let me jump immediately, though, to things that I've seen, because dhimmitude is the mind of the dhimmi. That is, it's the person who adopts this position of being subjugated by Islam. One of the first things that happened after 9/11 was here in Nashville, Tennessee, there arose the thing of bridge building and interfaith dialogue. So we went to one of these interfaith dialogues, and it was, shall we just say, disappointing. The rabbi knew nothing about Islam and had never read the Quran, didn't know anything about the life of Muhammad or the Hadith. The Baptist minister was in the same position. So then we asked the imam, do you know about the New Testament? Oh yes, I've studied the New Testament, had several courses in it. What about the Old Testament? Oh yes, I've studied Old Testament as well. So here we are, we have three people supposedly advocating being in a bridge building exercise, and who did their homework? Only one person did their homework. Now here's the tragedy. It's now been since 9/11, what is it, 15 years roughly, 16, doing quick math.
Yep.
And the situation has not improved. That is, you'll still find ministers who will actually stand in the pulpit and talk about their Muslim brothers and say that, for instance, one of the head of and this is in a university as well. There's a Christian university here in town called Lipscomb University. You will go there, you will never learn about the dhimmi, you will never learn about the wars of conquest. You'll probably leave there and never even know that Iraq and Turkey used to be Christian. And instead, what we now teach, here's dhimmitude within the political system of Tennessee. We now in the 7th grade have a textbook for the children called social history. Anyway, it's a book on culture, amongst other things, religion. And in it, it says that Islam has a protected status for Christians and Jews, and that the Golden Age in Baghdad was one of the high points in civilization. Islam was the first to give women their rights. Now here's the problem with this. No one pushes back. This would be the time when someone who's the president of a university, a Christian university, would be to stand up and say, no, this is not the case. But instead, Christians write books trying to say how good it is under Islam. So the mind of the dhimmi, which is being subjugated, is alive and well in Nashville, Tennessee. Let me assure you of that.
Yeah, definitely. And Raymond, can you please enlighten our audience, if they have never read the Quran, can you please let them know about the Quran, Surah 9, Ayah 29, and the context of that?
Well, sure. Quran 9:29, and I can actually, look it up for you right now. But basically, it says, "Fight the people of the book until they." I almost have it. Let me just to keep it, to give you the legit one. Okay. Well, anyway, fight the people of the book until, basically, it gives all these things until they pay money, until they take up prayers, basically to convert, or they pay jizya, as we mentioned, which is the money to keep their religion, and feel themselves an yaduhum sagarun in Arabic. So they have to pay literally with their hand and be made to feel submissive. And this is really a big part, because that part of the Quran, which a lot of as Dr. Bill's pointing out here, it's always missing in the clean, hygienic Western renditions. But that part of the Quran gets a lot of time in the writings of the commentators and the exegetes, the Islamic ones. And they just go out and they talk about, for instance, a hadith where Muhammad says, if you come across the people of the book, Christian or Jew, push them so they're against the alleyway, kind of like a bully mentality, push them against the side, make them feel, let them know their place, make them feel small. And so you have a lot of other hadith from other caliph and so forth. They refer to the people of the book, or non-Muslims in general, as animals. Well, the Quran does too. I mean, the Quran refers to non-Muslims as cattle, dogs, pigs, and the worst of all creation in one of the verses. So there's a lot of contempt heaped upon the non-Muslim. And this concept that, the people of the book, it's unfortunate because here in the West, everything is about trying to give it a good spin. And so because the Christians and the Jews, historically, if you understand what happened, Muhammad was appropriating their religion for his own rights. That's what he was doing. So obviously, being the newcomer, the apprentice, if you will, he had to give them some due because he's following in their footsteps. Then when the time came to break and he was strong enough, essentially in Medina, right around 628 and 629, that's when Allah revealed, so supposedly, these verses of hostility against the people of the book. For all this talk that the Quran speaks well about Christians and Jews, you have verses in the Quran that say about Christians, and here I can read some. It's Quran 573 says, infidels, and by the way, the word infidel, which I translate as infidel, a lot of people do. In Arabic, it's kafir, and plural, kafirun or kafirin. And it's basically the worst thing you can be in Islam. So to translate it, sometimes they translate it as non-Muslim. I tend to translate it as infidel because it has a famous connotation. But you have to understand, to be a kafir is essentially the absolute worst thing a person can be. Your life is forfeit, unless, of course, you pay the jizya and all this. So Quran 573 says, infidels or kafir, kafirun are they who say God is one of three. Well, that's a reference to the Christian Trinity, which all mainstream Christian denominations, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, believe. Chapter 5:17, infidels or kafirs are they who say God is one of three. Infidels are they who say God is the Christ, Jesus, son of Mary. And again, that's a simplification of the Trinity, and so forth. You have a lot of these in there. So it's not a good thing to be a dhimmi. Yes, you are tolerated, and there's this whole, and we can probably get into it, it's very much grounded in a lot of psychological aspects. It reminds me very much of Stockholm Syndrome, what happens to people. And I think it was instituted by Muhammad because he was, for whatever else you want to say about him, very clever and had a good insight, I think, to human nature. It's a way of preying on the other and at the same time appearing to be magnanimous, and at the same time eventually making them come to your side. Because if we recall what we call the Islamic world, North Africa and the Middle East, in the 7th century, that was the heart of the Christian world. It wasn't, of course, Europe. If you looked at Christianity, which was flourishing widely in the 7th century, and it was mostly North Africa and in Egypt and Syria. That's why the Roman emperor moved to the east in Constantinople, which is very close to the east, right next to Asia Minor. And so people forget that, well, how did 2/3 of Christian territory end up becoming Muslim? If it's so wonderful and peaceful and you have your religion, I have mine, and all you have to do is pay a minimal tax as they present it, what made people convert? Well, of course, their official story is people just loved Islam, so they ran out of Christianity. But the truth is, if you look at it, it's precisely because of sporadic persecutions, which would always pop up, regardless of you being a dhimmi, just like they do now in Egypt and these countries, where we're in a modern era, and once all it takes is some rumor about a Coptic man dating a Muslim woman or something, or a Coptic man said something about the Quran, and then churches burn, riots, and so forth. So you had all that throughout history, and then every time, for example, in the history of al-Makrizi, a medieval Muslim historian, he really documents the persecution that the Copts in Egypt went through. And after every bout of wild persecution where people were burned alive in the streets and crosses destroyed, churches burned, women raped, he ends up saying, and under these circumstances, a great many Copts became Muslims. Allahu Akbar. So you have an idea of what's going on, but also in tandem with the persecution is the slow motion bleeding that came from the system of dhimmitude, whereby you pay all this money and then you're constantly made to feel inferior. And so naturally, not all people are saints or martyrs. So many people through the centuries converted. And that's how North Africa, which was once, Augustine is from modern day Algeria. And that's where the Bible was canonized, in Carthage. Now you don't have any Christians or just recent converts. Egypt, which used to be the largest Christian in Alexandria, the largest see in the whole area, now you have about 10%. So that's how it happened, from persecution, but also from this supposed great system of dhimmi, where you just pay a little tax and you're exempt from military service as they portray it, and so forth. That's how we got to where we're at right now.
And Dr. Warner, if kafirs are so bad, then what's the purpose of keeping them alive rather than killing them? We don't have your audio for some reason. Hopefully we fix that.
You do not have...
We have you now. Please start over.
You read me now?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
By the way, I remember when phones were very old and they had wires into the wall and no one ever said, "Do you hear me now?"
Right.
Anyway,
Yep.
There's a lesson in economics here. This was the first dhimmis were in Khaybar, and they were there after Muhammad had already made Medina, which was half Jewish when he moved there, but he drove out the three tribes and enslaved them, took their money. But anyway, Medina became Judenrein, cleansed of Jews. Now then, once it was cleansed of Jews, Muhammad then later attacked the Jews of Khaybar. And once he defeated them, he now had an economic question. They were farmers, and he did not want to kill them or enslave them. Instead, he needed someone to work the land. So he came up with the concept of working the land, and then the jizya, which was a tax, was half the income would be paid to the Muslims. So there's an economics lesson in the background here. And by the way, Raymond mentioned something which I'd like to dwell on. I have a small campaign which I would like to see the word kafir become as common as infidel, because that is the original word, and I use the word kafir singular, and I also say kafirs plural with an S, because I want it to be an anglicized word, because these other words, infidel and whatnot, do not capture the full. First off, they doesn't capture the treatment of all persecuted peoples under Islam. Whether you're a Jew, a Christian, a Hindu, or an atheist, it pretty much boils down to the same thing. If you're a kafir, as Raymond pointed out earlier, you're scum. You're Allah's scum, lower than an animal. Nothing's worse than a kafir. So anyway, the dhimmi involves a certain amount of economics to it, and it's a very practical system. As a matter of fact, I believe I think I have the right caliph, Umar, advised not to abuse the dhimmis too much, because they are the source of income, the constant tax flow that comes into the Muslim government. So the lesson here is that although we may claim that Christians and Jews have a special place in Islam, that special place is one of denigration. What Raymond has talked about here about what happens to Christianity long enough, Christianity does not disappear because of convert or die. Instead, it disappears because of the status of the dhimmi, the constant humiliation. If your daughter's raped, you can't even file a complaint with the police. You can't testify in court. If the kids want to throw stones at you, you can't strike one of them back. All of these humiliations that go on and on after centuries, and it takes centuries. When Turkey was invaded, it was originally Christian. And by the way, there are pastors here in Nashville, Tennessee, who do not know that Christianity was the dominant religion in Turkey, or for that matter, Iraq, or for that matter, Syria. You would not believe the historical ignorance that the pastors in Nashville have here. Probably the same as elsewhere, but I'm only talking about what I've run into here, so therefore I know I'm true. But anyway, this history of the dhimmi is very important for everyone to learn, because it gives you the future. I call it the law of saturation. Once Islam is introduced over the centuries, it will come to dominate all, as it does in Turkey. I think the Christians in Turkey now went from 100% to 0.3%, and the difficulty of this is that it takes centuries to occur. So we're so geared to immediate satisfaction that if it doesn't happen in our generation, we don't think it happens. But Islam uses a calendar, whereas the Kafirs use a watch. Islam is very patient, and it knows that the process of dhimmification will convert every human being to Islam finally.
Now, we have to take a break in just a couple of minutes. Before we do that, Raymond, I want to ask you very quickly, with all the stuff that Dr. Warner just presented and the stuff that you presented yourself, so what should people know? What's the explanation to why so many Muslims in the West aren't saying this themselves? Is it because, number one, they haven't read the primary sources, so they don't know about them, or they're just practicing the Meccan surahs, knowing that when Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina for the Hijrah, then it became worse for non-Muslims? Or, I mean, what's the explanation to why you're hearing this more from people like us than you are from Muslims themselves?
Well, it's all the above that you mentioned. To be sure, there's a lot of Muslims, especially in the West, who are ignorant of their own religion, who, like most Western Christians, don't really know the first thing. They believe what they're told. And if they're listening to Westerners say how great and peaceful Islam is, maybe that's what they believe. So there are some of those. There are the others who, of course, know that it's not very opportune to start boasting about the need to do this. If you are, and like you said, quoting the Meccan surahs and so forth, this is a very popular thing that Muslims do, that they are enjoined to do, actually, which is when you are, if you look at the Quran, it's so contradictory. You have these surahs or chapters which do seem tolerant and peaceful and so forth. Then you have the other ones, which we're talking about. And the reason for that is because, and this is, of course, according to Islamic jurists, not myself, and exegetes, the reason for that is because as the verses and revelations were revealed to Muhammad by Allah, his circumstances kept changing. So, of course, Allah kept changing things up. The long and short of it is when Muhammad was weak in Mecca, you have to remember for 10 years almost he preached, and all he had was about 100 followers, mostly relatives. He had no strength, no nothing. If he was the one actually being pushed around by the pagans or the Quraysh tribe. Well, then when he went to Medina and he got stronger and started getting recruits and so forth, going on the jihad, basically raids or ghazwas, that's when you got all the violent verses. And that's also where you get the verses now attacking Jews, attacking Christians, whereas before they were the people of the book and so forth. Now in Medina, you get that they're infidels, fight them, and so forth. So Muslims have known that when Muslims are in America, for example, and they're weak and outnumbered, it's obviously doesn't behoove them to go around saying, yes, you need to pay me jizya. So they do start quoting the Meccan verses about you have your religion, I have mine, et cetera, et cetera. This is all, of course, tied up to the concept of taqiyya, which also is in the Quran, and it allows Muslims, when they feel themselves overpowered by infidels, such as when they live with them and they're a minority, to dissemble. They can dissemble to the point of cursing Muhammad, denouncing him, kissing the cross, going into churches, all things, of course, which are anathema to a Muslim. But these are permitted to a Muslim if he fears for his life and so forth. So, I think a lot more Muslims, if they're practicing Muslims, if they are observant Muslims, are doing that, because this issue is not some sidelined arcane thing. This is very prominent. It comes out always in Quranic writings and so forth. So they don't talk about it. That's the reason.
Excellent. Well, we do have to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be joined by a Muslim guest. He's a Quran-only Muslim, so that'll be interesting, but he will be joining us. Please stay right where you are. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes for this very important show called The History of Dhimmitude. Hello friends, welcome back to ABN's Trinity channel for this second International Apologetics Marathon of 2017. Today is day number 2, and this is show number 1, in English at least, is called The History of Dhimmitude. I have Bashar Shukri here in the studio with me, as well as 2 great guests through Skype, Raymond Ibrahim and Dr. Bill Warner. But joining us now is Adip Yüksel. He says that he broke with Islamism in 1986 and adopted the Quran alone philosophy as preached by Rashad Khalifa, the inspiration of United Submitters International, whose beliefs include the dedication of all worship practices to God alone, upholding the Quran alone, and rejecting the Islamic traditionalist Hadith and Sunnah attributed to Muhammad. Adip, welcome back to ABN's Trinity channel.
Welcome.
What would you like, we just have you on for a few minutes, what would you like to share with our audience about the history of Dhimmitude from your perspective?
First of all, first time I see Bill Warner. With Bill Warner, we have a history. We have a debate, a symposium with him. In this book, it is published. Let me show the subtitle of the book. And this is Peacemaker's Guide to Warmongers. And now, first time I see Bill Warner. Here I refute your arguments, and it was a good debate. You think that you refuted mine. That's fine. Nice to see you, Bill.
Good to see you.
Yeah, okay. Now, first of all, I would like to address just few itsy-bitsy stuff. I would like really to invite you or your other friend to face-to-face, one-to-one discussion, because when there are so many people involved and when so many issues thrown in and each issue has its own quirk, it doesn't become really a fair discussion of the issue. You said Iraq and Syria were Christians once. Well, before Byzantine Empire killed people with swords in that area, turned them to Christian. Who do you think were there? Were those places empty? Iraq and Syria, empty places? Were there people? Like Christians came to United States. Was it empty, or they committed genocide against shamans, which they were Native Americans, falsely called Indians, Indian Americans. Anyway, therefore, each religions, when they allied to the power, to the emperor, to the sultan, they each committed atrocities in the name of God. Here I have just a book. This is a simple book. It is about tortures in prison.
My question was, what is your input on the history of Dhimmitude? I know you're going to hold up books, you're going to hold up your Quran that you translated and all that stuff, but we have a 1-hour show. We have multiple guests. It's not a debate, so it's not a one-on-one discussion back and forth. But if, I'm giving you a few minutes, I'm going to give you one more minute. Can you please explain to our audience from the Islamic perspective, the Quran-only perspective, I guess, the history of Dhimmitude, or an explanation for it?
But would you give me 1 minute to have a segue to the issue, the verse that you are using, like chapter 9, verse 29?
Okay,
I would like to talk about
please comment on that.
But I expect a Christian to be fair, not like a Salafi. When I see you, I see Salafi Christians. You are as an extremist as they are. I see innuendos is hatred against all Muslims. It is any Muslim who comes with peace, you say they are bad people, we need to subjugate them because when they become strong, they will subjugate. This paranoia will only beget wars and conflict. I am tired of this conflict. People hiding behind something and staging wars. Okay. I ask you one question.
Adib, you're not saying, okay, here's my perspective or anything like that. Every time you come on, you give the same spiel of you're pointing to America, you're pointing to Christianity, you're giving these revisionist ideas that actually don't correspond to actual history or any of that. We do have you scheduled for other shows this week. Please take advantage of that time that we're giving you. But we wanted to go back to Raymond Ibrahim and Dr. Warner, who we're blessed to have with us. Dr. Warner, you have studied the Hadith. You actually have a small book that you've compiled for people who have no idea what the Hadith is. What is the problem historically for someone like Adib or any other Quran-only Muslim in the world today who just wants to throw out the Hadith like it holds no water whatsoever?
Well, let's take the example of the Quran itself. I like to count and measure, and I count there are 91 verses in the Quran which state that every Muslim is to follow the way of Muhammad. That is, their life is to imitate Muhammad. This is an ongoing theme. If you don't live your life like Muhammad, you'll go to hell. And if you want to go to paradise, you have to live your life like Muhammad. So I wonder why the Quran says in 91 verses that you're supposed to live like Muhammad. And where do we find Muhammad? Well, not in the Quran. We find him in the Sirah, his biography, and the Hadith, his traditions. So I'm not sure what Quran only means in that sense, because it doesn't appear to me that the Quran by itself will stand alone.
Well, Adib didn't give a whole lot of information to respond to other than his claim about Iraq and all that stuff. Raymond, what would you like to say in response to the claim that Christians went and killed people and that's why those became Christian to begin with?
Well, I have 2 points, and one of them is that, of course, to respond to the claim that, well, Christians did this too. Here we go again. This is the usual way of argumentation. It's an appeal to relativistic thinking, which has already been ingrained in everyone's mind, so that they don't have to know where the historical sources are, what the history says. We already know all people do this sort of thing. It's not just Islam, and therefore we accept it. While I can sit here and rattle off any number of primary historical sources, mostly Islamic and Arabic, and of course Latin and Greek, who all unequivocally do nothing but document bloodshed after bloodshed, conquest after conquest, I would challenge him. Well, show me where these books are that talk about. He said before, he was basically saying before Islam, well, how did Christianity spread in Iraq and Syria? Was it obviously by the sword? I don't know where that comes from. I've never read that. People actually embraced it. Constantine embraced Christianity as the emperor. No one put a sword to his head. He was the emperor. He just did. And then he issued the Edict of Milan, And then it became the moving thing. Everyone started converting to Christianity. There was no swords or bloodshed. The only anecdote I can ever think of historically from that era is Charlemagne fighting the Saxons to the east and supposedly forcing them to convert. But even in that context, it was always understood as the only way to make them stop being violent pagans who want to burn us alive and do human sacrifices was to Christianize them and make them Christian. So be that as it may, there's your one anecdote compared to volumes of Islamic histories that just boast. I mean, we all know the word futahat, the openings. All the original, earliest and oldest Islamic histories written in Arabic, including about Muhammad, are called the Maghazi. They're not even biographies. They're just raid after raid after raid, and there's very little hagiography to them. It's just violence and bloodshed and who plundered who and who enslaved who and who raped who. And that's it. So I would ask him, instead of just saying it and appealing to relativism, show me where this happened and show me a comparison. And then the second point is, he's a Quranist, and I know exactly what he is. His kind of Muslim say that we just believe in the Quran. We are repudiating the Hadith and the Sirah and the biography and so forth. And more power to you if you do that. Okay, but the Quran is, and I agree, the Hadith has a lot more detailed intolerance and violence, but it's in the Quran as well, as Bill already noted. And so, for example, Quran 9:29, and by the way, I pulled it up, so let me finally read it. 9:29 says, "Fight those among the people of the book, Jews and Christians, who do not believe in Allah, nor the last day, nor forbid what Allah and his messenger have forbidden," which essentially means become Muslims. I mean, that's what Allah and his messenger forbid and permit. Well, that's Sharia law as we know it today. Nor forbid, nor uphold what Allah and his messenger have forbidden, nor embrace the religion of truth. Well, there it is. So fight them unless they embrace the religion of truth. And if they don't, and then they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So he can also show me a biblical verse that's equivalent to that while he's at it. And the final point about the Quranists, such as himself, is yes, he mentioned he wants to debate me, I think, or Dr. Bill or whoever. He needs to debate Muslims, not us, because in the real world, in the Muslim world, he counts for nothing. Al-Azhar has already said that Quranism and what he's trying to do is complete kufr. It's being an infidel. They represent maybe not even 1% of the Muslim world. So he needs to go and actually get his co-religionists to agree with his vision that it's just the Quran and we're going to do away with the Hadith, and not come and argue with me or anyone else, because we're not the issue. It's the Muslim world that you have to convince. And as of now, Quranism is just a heresy that will get you actually killed.
And the thing that I want to respond to as well with the Deep saying that, we hate Christians or we're like Christian Salafists or whatever, ABN in the Trinity channel is unlike any other network out there because we don't demonize Islam and Muslims, say all Muslims are the enemy. We also don't say it's just all about love. Don't worry about Islamic history. Don't worry about Sharia. It's no threat to any country in the West or anything like that. We have this healthy middle where we love Muslims because they're people made in the image of God who need a savior, but at the same time we critique Islam and we don't sugarcoat it. And this is why ABN and the Trinity channel are so important, and for people to watch this, because Edip, we love you. We love you because you're a human being, and we want you to get to hear the gospel and respond to the gospel. And that is why these different countries that you referred to were Christian, because it was a message, good news that spread that people embraced. The sword was not necessary to kill anyone who didn't agree or who left Islam. Christianity is never taught to kill Christians if they leave the religion or anything like that. It was a gospel of peace that was spread through all these different countries before Muslims went and invaded in a supposed defensive wars, which we don't see when we look at the primary sources and all of that. Now, I want to get more to today. And at first, I want to ask Bashar. I want to get a lot closer to where we are today. And Dr. Bill, I'm going to ask you in a minute, how do we see Dhimmitude in the church today, in schools today, that kind of thing. But as we work our way this way, Bashar, was America ever in Dhimmitude or forced to pay a jizya, working our way from the time of Muhammad up a little bit closer till now, at least?
Yeah. Well, America, as we all know, was founded in 1776. But what's interesting, a lot of people don't know this about our history, is, yes, we did have a conflict with the caliphate, particularly the Barbary states. So I won't say we ever been in Dhimmitude, But I will say we did pay a jizya, or what they would call a tribute. So I'll go over a couple things. After we had won the war, we were still trading with Europe at that time, but France no longer wanted to protect our ships. So after that time, our ships were completely open to pirate attacks. And these pirates from the Barbary States, also, this is a key fact most people don't know, between the 16th and 19th century, it is estimated about 1 to 1.5 million Europeans were taken as slaves in that period. So while they were, taking Europeans, they were also raiding our ships. So between 1785 and 1795, we met up with the ambassador of Tripoli to figure out what's going on here. So we had to pay a tribute of 660,000 for each 4 of the Barbary states, which totals about 2.5 million. And from the years of 1795 to 1800, it was payment over a million a year for the tribute to the Barbary states. And that was, at that time, a sixth of our budget. So these Barbary states, the Caliphate, could have almost destroyed America in its advent while we were still a new baby country. And let me read, actually, something that Thomas Jefferson was writing to John Jay, one of his men. And you can actually find this in the Library of Congress. This isn't made up. I didn't read this out of thin air. So he speaks to him and he says, "We took the liberty, John, to make some inquiries concerning the grounds of their pretensions," the Barbary pirates, "to make war upon a nation who had done them no injury." America had done nothing to these pirates. "And observed that we considered all mankind as our friends, who had done no wrong, nor had given us any provocation." So why are you, he's asking to John Jay, we asked him, why are you doing this to us? This, interestingly, is how the ambassador of Tripoli responds. He says, "The ambassador answered us that it was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Quran, that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Muslim who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise." Now, this was this was in the 18th century, and it's eerily similar to how terrorists speak today. So at this point, Jefferson was sick of it. He's saying paying any more tribute will encourage more attacks. So this is why we actually created the Navy, sent our Marines there, and this is called the First and Second Battle of the Barbary States. And and just one last thing. And we actually have this stamped in history with the Marines hymn that starts from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. So this will always be in history, and we'll always remember that the Ottoman Empire tried to end early America by making us paying tribute.
And the Ottoman Empire fell in 1924, 4 years later, under Hassan al-Banna, created the Al-Awan al-Muslimin, Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, that gets us a little bit closer to where we are now. And I want to ask Dr. Warner, how do we see Dhimmitude today in the church, in schools, and in the media?
I hate to even talk about this, it's so bad. But of the information that we've said here today with Raymond, you and Tony, we have Christian universities here, and Nashville, Tennessee is called the buckle on the Bible Belt. And let me assure you that if this phrase is true, the church's pants are down around its ankles. Because we have talked more about Islam today in this one session than you'll find at an entire university. Christian universities don't teach the history of conquest. If you went, one of the instructors in the Bible, the head of the Bible department, said he would never say that Christianity was a better religion than Islam. I mean, how demified can you get? So what we find is that, and by the way, the churches have a very poor record at converting Muslims to Christianity. Why? Because they don't study dawah. As a matter of fact, I bet you we couldn't find, out of the thousands of people on this Christian university, I bet we couldn't find one professor who knew what the word dawah meant. They would have a vague idea about Sharia, but very little. So what we have here is a willful ignorance. The Christians take refuge in that, well, we need to love our enemies, we need to turn the other cheek. This is sort of their only response to Islam. They don't believe that, and they also will totally ignore the persecuted church. I'm bringing in a person here who's from Europe who is an Iraqi Muslim who became a Christian. He's been very successful at converting Muslims to Christianity. If I brought him and put him in an auditorium, I couldn't get, out of all of Nashville, Tennessee, I bet I couldn't get 10 ministers to come hear him. And yet this man preaches the gospel within the sounds of Islamic State's artillery. But would they come to see him? No, because the church has its head buried in the sand. It believes that in Nashville, Tennessee, the churches have reduced the entire Bible down to 2 breaths. Be nice. And since confronting someone about error would not be nice, they don't do it. It breaks my heart to say this, but the churches here in Nashville, Tennessee, and again, I just keep talking about Nashville. For all I know, they're different in Abilene, Kansas, but I doubt it. But anyway, here the ignorance, willful ignorance, I call it professional ignorance, is the mark of the day. Raymond, I bet you've experienced the same thing.
Oh, I have, Bill.
And this is the norm, I think, throughout the United States. Raymond, I think we had your mic down. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I would just add to what Bill was saying. Nashville, Tennessee is actually one of the more conservative areas. So what he's describing, he can rest assured it's a lot worse in most places, if not the overwhelming majority of places of America. And just to add and amplifying what he said, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that we always hear in American polls that America is 85% Christian, et cetera, et cetera. And then you come and find what we're talking about happening, and then you come and find that, well, America is basically Sodom and Gomorrah, and you try to reconcile how could such a Christian nation be like that? Well, you have to understand that the root source of what's happening here is that Christianity, or what I call Western Christianity, or as I told Bill before, I call it useful idiot Christianity, doormat Christianity, the sort that prevails here, and it comes under all kinds of denominations, Catholic, Protestant, etc., is the sort that has learned to take just that part of the gospel that actually comports with liberal values, tolerance and forgiveness, and so forth, non-judgmentalism, but then to jettison and completely throw out all the other parts about Jesus telling people to be as wise as serpents, Jesus hurling tables and whipping people because they're actually profaning the temple and the house of God and so forth. So Christians have learned not to do any of that stuff. The more conservative, if you will, or more cognizant to reality and cautious of your own way of life and your own Christianity things. And they've been reduced into just becoming doormats to basically say, yes, everything's okay. Yes, what Muslims do is wonderful. Yes, Muslims are better than us. We cannot even hurt their feelings or say anything. Yes, who am I to judge? Oh, yes, look what the Crusaders have done, et cetera, et cetera. A few years ago from Germany, I don't know how many hundreds of Protestants marched from Germany to Jerusalem wearing shirts, and in Arabic it said, "I'm sorry," and it came to apologize for the Crusaders. And again, this is built on this misunderstanding of what the Crusades were, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what's going on with Christianity in the West is it's so diluted, so watered down, so made to comport perfectly with whatever liberalism wants to say, including moral relativism, multi-religion, multiculturalism, et cetera, et cetera. And but they don't speak for true Christianity, and that's why you're seeing it. We're not really talking about Christians, and I don't mean to be judgmental, but this is the reality of it, because a Christian stands for what's right. A Christian calls out what's wrong. A Christian calls out what's false, and they try to rectify it. They don't turn into doormats.
And this is something that we need to encourage the church in the West, especially here in America. I mean, we're seeing, up in Canada, M103 gets passed, which is the first step to criminalizing Islamophobia. And we, again, like I said earlier, we have this watered-down, sugar-coated Walt Disney version of Islam that is being spread throughout the United States. And people are not looking to the primary sources, which is where Dr. Warner has looked and studied, where Raymond Ibrahim has looked and studied. They're listening to their Muslim neighbor, coworker, friend, classmate, etc., who does not define Islam. Muhammad defined it 1,400 years ago. And although we want to reach out to our Muslim neighbors, I mean, we don't want to say, hey, look, this is what the primary sources say. You need to be more like Muhammad. We don't want to do that, right? We want to meet them where they are at and point them to Jesus Christ from there. Yep. But at the same time, don't let them define Islam for you. Get Raymond Ibrahim's books, get Dr. Warner's books, look at the primary sources, and see what Islam is according to Muhammad and his earliest followers. Raymond Ibrahim's Crucified Again lets you know what's happening in other countries. If you live here in the West, what's happening other places? There's a lot of news that happens every single week that we don't even hear about in the West. So we thank God for people like Raymond Ibrahim and Dr. Warner, and even you, Bashar, to give us that more closer to today details about what has happened with this. Yeah. But Dhimmitude is something that continues today. There are countries in North Africa, I think Mauritania, I forget what country it is, where slavery wasn't even outlawed till like 2007 or something like that, right? Yeah. Saudi Arabia wasn't outlawed till probably 30, maybe 40 years ago at the most. So we don't see exactly what's happening in those sources today, but we're seeing hints of it. And of course, as Dr. Warner has let us know, we know what the end goal is of Islam. Now, of course, with someone like Adib, who left, I gave him time to talk. He didn't take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. We care about him because he's a person who needs the gospel. I would encourage him, please email me, let me know what Muslim news station out there says, hey, we love Christians, but they're just wrong, so let's talk about their primary sources here and let them know where they're wrong. You don't get that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's ABN and the Trinity channel who say, hey, we love Muslims. We want to get the gospel to Muslims, but we don't sugarcoat Islam. We point to the primary sources, and unfortunately, for the most part, we have to look to Westerners for actual truth, actual history, rather than the many Muslims out there who don't even study their primary sources for themselves, as Ibn Ibrahim had asserted as well. Okay, we have to end our show, but I do want to give Raymond a minute or two to give a closing statement. Same thing for Dr. Warner. Raymond, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, just to cap off what we're talking about, and to show the continuity of what's going on and also where it doesn't agree. So Dhimmitude was an enforced thing. It was part of Islamic law, Islamic teaching, and Christians and Jews and whoever came under the sway of Islam had to live and abide by it, or the forfeiture, the price is your life, essentially. What we're seeing today, though, when we talk about Western Dhimmitude, is the exact opposite. It's voluntary. And that's what makes it a little bit more contemptible in my point of view. It's people, Westerners, running and rushing over themselves to take the role of what Muslims expect an infidel who is subdued to act. And this is why when Westerners do all this thing and they appease and they walk on eggshells and they don't say anything, that doesn't win brownie points with Muslims as they may think. What that does is it reinforces the old paradigm of Muslim over infidel or kafir, and therefore when Westerners appease and essentially brown nose, that only brings out contempt and a sense of superiority amongst Muslims because they feel that's their given right. And the reason the infidels are doing this is because they too know that they are worthless and beneath the Muslim. And so this is how it's being understood today, and this is actually what makes it so much more disgusting, that it's voluntary dhimmitude, whereas historically it was something that was just pushed on whoever got subjugated by Islam, and they had to abide by it. So it's one thing to be forced into another thing to actively just promote it and go out of your way to embrace the dhimmitude.
Dr. Warner, up in Canada, they obviously don't know that when they pass these resolutions to criminalize Islamophobia, all they're doing is implementing aspects of Sharia upon themselves, and the political Islamists are actually celebrating this. What closing statement would you like to give to our audience, sir?
Well, you're quite right with regards to the situation in Canada. M103 is basically a Sharia bill, and it implements Sharia law within Canada. That is, who will determine Islamophobia? Muslims will determine it. And they'll look at, as a matter of fact, I can see the day will come before I die that I will not be able to go to Canada or even sell my books there because it is becoming a Sharia state. Let me add one more thing here, which is not about Dhimmitude, but it's about ABN. ABN is a remarkable resource. I do not know of anywhere else the conversation that we've had here today can take place. If I had my way and I were superpower, I would make sure that every church got to hear one show like this at least, to see what honesty is like, to see what reality is like. Because what ABN does is very, very unique. It is a wonderful forum, and so that's how I'll end, is saying, Yeh Ra ABN.
Amen. Thank you so much. we want to thank you, Raymond, for being on once again. Thank you, Dr. Warner. I want to encourage our viewers once again, go to Amazon or anywhere where you buy books, type in Raymond Ibrahim, type in Bill Warner. You will have a list of resources to get. Friends, as you have seen here today, these are the men who we need to look to. We need to look to them who have done their homework. We need to go and get those primary sources for ourselves. You know, just because Raymond Ibrahim or Dr. Warner said it doesn't mean it's true either. So, hey, you know, cross-reference what they're saying to the primary sources. And you'll find that in their books that they write, they have the footnotes, they have the endnotes, they have the sources letting you know, hey, these are the verses we're talking about. This is the chapter we're talking about. This is whatever we're talking about. They're actually giving you sources for it. And you're not going to get this hardly anywhere in the West. And of course, television-wise, nowhere else other than ABN's Trinity channel, which is all of our English shows. So we want to thank you for being with us. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Warner. Thank you, Raymond Ibrahim, for being on. Friends, please go to Amazon or wherever you get books today, type in their names, buy their books, get informed, and help inform people around you. By God's grace, we have this ability, this technology, to share this news with the world. All these shows go through satellite to North Africa, the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand. They go throughout the world through high-speed internet. If you have an iPhone or Android phone, you can download a free app and get this stuff throughout the world through high-speed internet and all the many internet-based devices that we have. But if we as Christians don't share the gospel with Muslims, who is going to? Yeah. No one's going to. Right. We are Muslims' only hope. Mm-hmm. We need to be sharing the gospel with them. And at the same time, we need to defend the historic Christian faith. That's what apologetics is all about. That's what the International Apologetics Marathons are all about. Mm-hmm. And letting people know that Christianity is a reasonable faith based on evidence. And we need to share that evidence along with the gospel. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back in just about an hour for the next show in this second International Apologetics Marathon of 2017.